Welcome back to Under Baobab Skies. Tonight we delve into the story of the Benin Bronze casters, men who stood between art and fire, who breathed in smoke and prayers, who turned molten metal into visions that still astonished the world. Their work was dangerous. Their lives, both celebrated and burdened, were caught between the court's demands, the weight of ritual, and the constant threat of flames. Yet, out of the heat, they pulled forms so graceful, so precise, that they have never been forgotten. These were not just artisans. They were alchemists of history, transmuting the arbor's will into enduring legacies of brass and bronze. Each piece was a testament, a prayer cast in metal, a story told for eternity. The skill required was immense, passed down through generations, a secret guarded as fiercely as the kingdom's treasures themselves. For every finished plaque or head that gleamed in the royal court, there were countless hours of toil, of near misses, of burns and exhaustion. Imagine with me now the hum of crickets outside a mud-walled compound, the orange glow of a charcoal furnace painting the darkness with its fierce, living light. Sparks lift into the night air like restless spirits, dancing for a moment before disappearing into the vast African sky. In the courtyard, men in simple wrappers wipe sweat from their brows, their bodies glistening under the fire's gaze. The bellows they work are thumping like the slow, deliberate beat of a drum, a heartbeat for the creation to come. In their hands, clay molds wait, packed with wax models of intricate design, ready to meet the fire that will both destroy and create, and not far away, inside the palace walls. An Oba, the divine king of Benin, dreams of glory, of his ancestors, of his power, all cast forever in shimmering, imperishable bronze. The Benin Bronzes, as the world calls them, are not just artworks. They are chronicles of kingship, maps of empire, memory carved into metal. They are ritual and craft fused together, a library of a civilization's soul. These plaques, sculptures, and ceremonial objects documented the kingdom's history, its spiritual beliefs, and the elaborate structure of its royal court. They depicted kings and queen mothers, warriors and courtiers, even the first European traders to arrive on their shores. Yet, behind their gleaming surfaces lies a harsher truth for the men who made them. It was a life of blistering heat, toxic fumes from melting metals, aching muscles from endless hammering and polishing, and the constant threat of injury or death from a misstep, a cracked mold, or an explosion of molten brass. Tonight, we will walk slowly through their world, guided by the flicker of the forge. First, we will feel the weight of their daily labor, the fire, the danger, the ritual demands that preceded every pour. We will learn the secrets of the lost wax technique, a process as demanding as it was miraculous. Then, we will step back into the history of Benin art, tracing its origins and understanding how these bronzes became the ultimate symbols of royal power, the treasures of kings and the envy of foreign powers. Later, we will wander through the mystery of the lost bronzes, the painful story of their looting in 1897, their scattering across the globe, and the complex, emotional debates now taking place in museums far from their home. And finally, we will sit with the question of patronage, how rulers like the Oba shaped the destiny of these artists, and how much freedom or constraint a court-sponsored hand truly had in a world where art and authority were one. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. As we begin, remember, this story is not just about art, it is about endurance. It is about the resilience of a people and the profound spirit embedded in their craft. It is about human beings who lived close to both fire and spirit, who toiled in suffocating heat so that kings could shine in bronze and their histories would not be lost to time. It is about memory and loss, about the pride of a kingdom and the survival of a legacy against all odds. It is, above all, about the weight carried by the hands that shaped history, hands that forged beauty out of the most unforgiving elements. You are now under baobab skies, and the story begins now. The courtyard is hot long before dawn. The air carries the sour temps of smoke mixed with the iron-rich scent of earth. The casters rise early, their bodies already marked by burns, their lungs heavy with years of inhaling ash. Their lives, though tied to beauty, are lived in a world of grit and risk. To cast bronze in Benin was not a simple task. It was a dance with fire, and every step carried danger. The metal had to be melted until it flowed like the sun itself, glowing, hissing, dangerous to even look at directly. In the furnaces, copper, tin, and brass scraps brought by traders were fed into clay crucibles. At times, imported Manila's crescent-shaped copper bracelets, once used as currency, were melted down for the work. These materials, gathered from distant lands, held stories of trade, power, and human connection, all destined to be transformed in the crucible's fiery embrace. The casters, as stewards of this transformation, knew the weight of their responsibility. Each piece of scrap was not just metal. It was potential, a whisper of the final form it would take. Imagine leaning close to a furnace made of mud and clay, its mouth red-hot air whipped into it by goatskin bellows. Each gust of breath-fed fire raised the temperature until the clay itself seemed to pulse with life. The rhythmic pumping of the bellows was the heartbeat of the workshop, a constant, straining effort to coax the flames to their peak fury. The heat was a physical presence, a wall you could feel against your skin, stealing the moisture from the air and from your body. Sweat would pour from the casters' brows, stinging their eyes, but their focus never wavered. If the crucible cracked, molten metal could spill like a river of death, searing flesh, devouring wood, setting everything aflame. For the caster, there was no margin for error. A moment of distraction, a flaw in the clay, a miscalculation in the heatiny of these could spell disaster, not just for the artwork, but for the artisans themselves. The lost wax method, used in Benin, was ancient and intricate. First, an image was sculpted in beeswax, soft, pliable, alive beneath the hands of the artist. This initial creation was the soul of the final piece, a delicate form holding all the detail and character intended for the bronze. Around it, layers of fine clay were built, until the wax figure was completely entombed. This process required patience and a gentle touch, as each layer had to be applied perfectly to capture every nuance of the wax model. When placed in the furnace, the wax melted away, leaving a hollow cavity inside the hardened clay. Into that void, the molten metal was poured. One chance only. If the metal cooled too soon, or the mold cracked, the work, days or weeks of effort, was lost. The caster lived with this constant gamble. He worked knowing that failure was always waiting just beyond the flames. And beyond the physical danger lay the invisible poisons. The air around the workshop filled with fumes from burning wax, smoke from charcoal, and vapor from molten metal. No one wore masks. No one had ventilation. The caster's lungs carried the memory of each day's labor. The acrid smell was a constant companion, a reminder of the materials that gave their art life but slowly took life from them. Coughing fits, shortened breath, and illness were part of their inheritance. Generations of casters passed down not only their skills, but also the physical toll of their trade. Yet they endured because their craft was not simply a job. It was lineage. It was obligation. It was pride. It was the very fabric of their identity, woven into the history of their people and their kingdom. To falter was to dishonor the ancestors who had practiced the same sacred art. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. To be a bronze caster in Benin was also to carry ritual weight. The Guild of Casters, known as the Igon Ironwan, was not open to just anyone. It was hereditary, passed down within families tied to the craft. A boy born into such a family grew up with clay dust on his skin, with the rhythm of hammer and bellows in his ears. His playground was the workshop. His lullabies were the songs of creation. From childhood, he learned to sweep the courtyard, to knead clay, to blow the bellows, to prepare the molds. These were not chores, but lessons, the first steps on a long journey toward mastery. Only later, after years of apprenticeship and proving his worthiness, did he graduate to working with fire itself. This sacred trust was earned, not given, and with it came the responsibility to uphold the guild's revered traditions. But before every major casting, there were rituals to perform. Purity mattered. The Benin Bronzes were not simply art. They were sacred representations of power and lineage, physical manifestations of the kingdom's spiritual foundation. To cast for the king meant aligning oneself with forces both human and divine. The workshop became a holy space, a place where the material and immaterial worlds converged. Sacrifices were made, prayers whispered, protective charms tied around the wrist. These acts were meant to appease the gods and ancestors, to seek their blessing and guidance, ensuring the molten metal would flow true and the final form would be perfect. The failure of a casting was not only technical, it could be read as spiritual imbalance, as the anger of ancestors or the gods. This burden weighed on the casters as much as the heat. Each time they worked, they stood between two dangers, fire and spirit. Day after day, the casters endured this life. They bore burns that never healed cleanly, a testament to their proximity to the sacred flame. They lived with calloused hands, scarred arms, smoke-filled lungs. Their bodies were archives of their labor, each mark a story of a piece created, a risk taken. They worked under pressure, for the king expected perfection. The OBA's patronage was both a great honor and a heavy demand, as his commissions were the ultimate measure of the guild's skill. And yet, despite all this suffering, their craft produced masterpieces, plaques, heads, reliefs that carried the very soul of the Benin kingdom. These were not mere decorations. They were historical documents, ancestral portraits, and instruments of royal power. Their art was glory. Their lives were struggle. The brilliant shine of the finished bronze belied the sweat, pain, and peril of its creation. In each polished surface, one could almost see the reflection of the caster's own weary face. His sacrifice immortalized in the timeless beauty he had brought into the world. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The fire was not enough. In Benin, to melt metal and pour it into a mold was only half the struggle. The other half was unseen, breathing in the silence of shrines, whispered through incantations, woven into charms hanging on the walls of the casters' quarters. For to cast bronze was not merely a matter of craft, it was a matter of spirit. If a man dared shape the face of an oba, if he dared create an image to hold power and memory, he could not do so with unclean hands or a restless soul. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. and carved wooden figures. Smoke from incense rising into the air. Every bronze object began not with wax or fire, but with ritual. Long before the first flame was kindled, the casters prepared themselves, turning inward to face the world of spirits. They offered prayers to Osanobor, the high god who created all things, and to the ancestral spirits who guided the hands of their lineage. These rituals were the true foundation of their work. Sometimes chickens were sacrificed, their blood spilling onto the earth to mark it as a sacred space, a seal of purity against unseen corruption. At other times, kola nuts were broken, their halves shared among the casters in a pact of unity. The deep red skin of the nut was a premonition, echoing the crimson fire that would later pour from the crucibles, transforming dull metal into a thing of glory. A caster who dared to ignore these steps, who believed his skill alone was sufficient, was courting disaster. He risked a cracked mold, a twisted form, or worse, a bronze that failed to please the augur, an object devoid of spirit. The Guild of Casters, known as Igon Iranwan, was far more than a place of work. It was a sacred brotherhood, a fortress of tradition and spiritual discipline. Within its sun-drenched courtyards, young apprentices were taught not only how to hold their tools, but also how to carry themselves with a quiet, unwavering discipline. The lessons went beyond the shaping of clay or the heating of metal. You must keep your heart pure. The elders would tell them, their voices low and serious. For bronze will reveal the truth of your spirit. The metal, they believed, was an unforgiving mirror. It would reflect the caster's inner state, showing any discord or impurity for all to see. Purity was not a simple matter of ritual cleansing. It was a constant, demanding way of life. The casters lived under a code that governed their every action. Before a major casting, they would avoid certain foods, believing that what they consumed could either fortify or pollute their spiritual energy. Some refrained from arguments or quarrels, convinced that a flash of anger could poison the very fire they commanded, inviting malevolent forces into their work. Others wore protective charms, amulets of tooled leather containing folded cur, anik versusa, testament to the intermingling of faiths or indigenous blessings spoken over generations. These were their shields against envy, curses, and the spiritual attacks that might come from rivals or displeased spirits. The work itself carried a heavy burden of expectation. Each object they created was destined for the sacred space of the Ober's palace, a nexus of earthly and divine power. A miscast bronze head was not just a technical failure, it was a spiritual offense, a sign that the caster had fallen short in his duty to the gods and the king. To carve the likeness of a revered ancestor, or the proud, serene face of a living king, required a profound submission to forces that lay beyond mere human skill. The casters walked always with this invisible weight upon their shoulders. The knowledge that their work was watched not only by men, but by spirits who judged both their craft and their character. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire burns steadily, and we breathe in the night air. The sacred rituals extended deep into the workshop itself, transforming it from a place of labor into a kind of temple. Before the great furnaces were lit, casting a hellish glow upon the walls, certain herbs were burned. Their fragrant smoke drifted through the workspace, a purifying agent intended to drive away malevolent spirits that might delight in spoiling the caster's efforts. Some guilds whispered sacred words, ancient incantations passed down from master to apprentice, as the heavy crucibles filled with molten metal were lowered into the roaring flames. Even the molds, meticulously crafted from clay and wax, were treated as if they were alive. They were fed with palm oil, rubbed with chalk to bless their forms, and prayed over before receiving the searing liquid bronze. Apprentices quickly learned that their masters were not just craftsmen. They were priests of fire, mediators between the tangible and the intangible. This dual role was incredibly demanding. They had to work with the cold precision of an engineer and live with the constant, heightened awareness of a mystic. A single lapse in ritual, a forgotten prayer, or a moment of impurity could undo weeks of painstaking labor. And yet, it was through this very burden that they found their immense pride. The guild's survival, its prestige, and its favor with the Order all depended on its unwavering loyalty to both the craft and the spirit. Failure, when it came, was feared and whispered about in hushed tones. When a mold cracked during the casting, releasing the molten bronze in a fiery, useless spill, some would murmur that the caster had quarreled with his wife, his anger tainting the process. If a bronze emerged from its clay shell, twisted and malformed, others would say a jealous spirit had slipped into the workshop unseen to warp the metal. The responsibility for success and failure was never placed solely on the skills of the hand. It lay just as much in the unseen world, in the caster's spiritual conduct and his relationship with the forces that governed creation and destruction. The burden of purity extended beyond the individual caster to their entire family. A lineage carried its reputation like a banner. A family with a history of miscasts bore a deep, lingering shame, while one with an unbroken record of success was praised as spiritually upright and blessed by the ancestors. This reputation was a currency of its own. Marriages, alliances, and the selection of apprenticeships often depended on this perception of spiritual discipline. A master would not take on a student from a family known for its spiritual lapses, fearing the boy might bring a curse upon his workshop. This was the great paradox of the bronze caster's life. They lived at the crossroads of two dangerous, unforgiving worlds. On one side was the physical world of fire molten, merciless, and capable of inflicting terrible harm in an instant. On the other side was the spiritual world, populated by gods and ancestors who demanded constant vigilance, reverence, and purity of heart. Between these two forces, they balanced their lives, walking a narrow path forged from fear, pride, and an unshakable sense of duty. And yet, despite this immense burden, they endured. They faced the fire, they honored the spirits, and they continued their sacred work. For each successful bronze was more than just a piece of art. It was proof, it was a testament that they had honored the spirits, upheld the legacy of their lineage, and brought glory to the Ober's palace. Let's pause here for a moment. The flames dim low, and we hear the hush of the night wind. Through this profound fusion of ritual and craft, the bronzes of Benin became more than metal. They were transformed into vessels of spirit, living bridges that connected the Orber to his ancestors and his people. Every intricate plaque depicting a royal procession, every serene head of an Orber or Queen Mother, every small pendant worn as a protective charm each carried within it not just molten brass, but the echoes of prayers, the memory of sacrifices, and the heavy, sacred burden of purity. The casters bore that burden for centuries, and in doing so, they created an art that still breathes with that same sacred fire today. The fire roared. It was never just a flame, it was an inferno fed by charcoal, air pumped by bellows, and the patience of men who understood that only heat beyond imagination could melt brass, bronze, or copper. To work as a Benin bronze caster was to live inside smoke. Your lungs knew its taste. Your skin carried its smell long after the fire cooled. And your mind learned, from an early age, that no single mistake could be forgiven by the metal. This was not a craft for the careless or the impatient. It was a calling for those who could command fire and endure its fury, a discipline where every action, every breath, was measured against the unforgiving standards of molten bronze. The workshop was a crucible, not just for metal, but for the men themselves. Every bead of sweat carried the weight of perfection. One careless drip of perspiration onto the clay mold, a seemingly insignificant droplet, could cause steam to form inside. That steam would create a bubble in the molten bronze, a tiny pocket of air that would mar the final surface, a flaw that would be visible for centuries. A single misstep during the pour, a slight hesitation, or an unsteady hand, and the molten river would refuse to flow into the delicate, intricate channels of the clay mold you had labored over for weeks, sometimes months. The metal would cool too quickly, solidifying before it could fill every crevice, leaving a work incomplete, a ghost of what it was meant to be. To be a caster was to walk the thin, precarious line between mastery and failure meant more than just a ruined object. It meant shame that clung to you like the smoke from the furnace. It meant wasted resources, precious metals and clays that were not easily replaced. And it meant facing the cold anger from patrons, chiefs, nobles, or even the Auber himself, who demanded not just art, but a divine beauty that would endure for generations, a testament to their power and legacy. Inside the guild, silence was enforced when the metal was being poured. This was the moment of truth, the climax of all the preceding labor. The air, thick with heat and anticipation, held no room for distractions. There were no jokes to ease the tension, no idle laughter, no casual words exchanged between the men. Breath itself seemed to slow, to quieten, as if the entire workshop held a collective breath. It felt as if the ancestors, the great casters of generations past, leaned close to listen, to watch, to judge. The crucible, a heavy clay pot glowing with an inner, malevolent orange light, was lifted from the heart of the fire by steady hands wrapped in thick, damp cloth for protection. The men moved with a practiced, almost ritualistic grace, like dancers who had practiced the same sacred steps since childhood. Their movements were economical and precise. 2 steps forward toward the waiting mold. 1 careful step to the side to achieve the perfect position. A slow, deliberate tilt at precisely the right angle. In that moment, they were not just pouring metal. They were letting gravity and heat carve history into being, transforming a liquid fire into a solid, eternal form. But the danger was constant, a silent partner in the creative process. The intense, almost unbearable heat of the furnace could cause the crucible itself to shatter without warning. A hidden crack, an imperfection in the clay, and the vessel would explode, releasing its molten contents in a deadly spray. The molten bronze could splash, a stray droplet arcing through the air and landing on unprotected skin. It would burn through flesh like butter, instantly searing deep into muscle and bone, leaving behind scars that whispered stories more permanent and more painful than the art itself. Many of the older, more experienced casters bore these marks on their arms, their chests, or their legs. These were not just injuries, they were badges of survival, grim testaments to their experience and their courage. Yet they were also constant, physical reminders of the raw fury they had dared to tame. A fury that could never be fully controlled, only carefully guided. Perfection demanded repetition, an endless cycle of practice that bordered on obsession. Long before the real pour of molten bronze, apprentices rehearsed the entire ritual with empty crucibles. They practiced the lift, the walk, the tilt, over and over, until the movements became an extension of their bodies, an instinctual dance that left no room for error. Before a sculptor was ever entrusted with creating a royal figure, the head of an auber, or a queen mother, they first had to prove their skill on lesser subjects. They carved smaller, less critical models of animals, fish, or ceremonial masks, testing their hand against the demands of fine detail, learning the language of the wax and clay. Even the most experienced master, a man who had cast hundreds of successful works, could not rush the process. A wax model that cracked too soon from impatience, a vent hole for escaping gases that was misaligned by a fraction of an inch. A surface on the clay mold left rough or uneven. All of these small failures meant the bronze would betray the artist. It would flow imperfectly, trap air, or capture a flawed texture. And in the world of the guild, such a betrayal was unforgivable. The guild's punishment was not physical, not a whip or a fine. It was something far more devastating. Social, a failed work marked you with a public shame that was difficult to escape. Your reputation, carefully built over years, could be tarnished by a single, visible mistake. Other casters, your brothers in the guild, would not easily trust you in future rituals, sidelining you from the critical moments of the pour. Patrons, hearing of your failure, might withhold future commissions, turning instead to a caster whose hand was seen as more certain, more blessed. In a society where honor was woven into the very fabric of every public and private act, failure was not a private disappointment. It was a communal event, spoken of in hushed tones in courtyards, repeated as a cautionary tale in the markets, and whispered in the hallowed halls of the palaces. Your failure became a story, a lesson for others, and a weight you had to carry. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Yet, beyond the crushing weight of expectation, the suffocating smoke, and the searing sweat, there was pride. It was a pride so profound it made all the suffering worthwhile. It was the pride of seeing a finished head emerge from its shattered clay womb after days of cooling, perfect in its symmetry, polished to a deep, lustrous sheen, seemingly alive with the spirit of the ancestor it depicted. It was the immense pride of knowing that your hands, calloused and scarred, had joined a sacred lineage of craftsmen that stretched back centuries, linking you directly to the first casters who had stood in the same smoke, inhaled the same acrid fumes, and survived the same blistering risks. You were not just a man making an object. You were a link in an unbroken chain of cultural memory. For every burn scar that marked a caster's body, there was a masterpiece that would adorn a palace altar. For every sleepless night spent worrying over a cooling mold, there was the transcendent moment when the king himself, the divine auber, would inspect the work and give a slow, deliberate nod of satisfaction. In that silent, regal gesture, as he received a bronze cast so flawless it seemed not made by human hands but divinely breathed into existence, was the ultimate reward. That nod was validation. It was honor. It was proof that the suffering had meaning, that the immense physical and emotional cost of perfection was never, ever wasted. It affirmed your place in the guild, in the kingdom, and in history. The sweat was endless. The smoke was choking. But the legacy was eternal. The Benin Bronze casters lived on the edge of survival, bearing heat, danger, and exhaustion, all for a perfection that could never be compromised. Their sweat and scars were as much part of their art as the gleaming bronzes that still amaze the world today. Deep within the emerald forests of West Africa, a kingdom arose like a hidden jewel. Its name was Benin. Imagine a city, vast and sprawling, protected not by stone, but by immense earthen walls and deep moats. So immense, in fact, that the first Europeans to see them compared them to the Great Pyramids of Egypt. This was Benin City, the heart of an empire. But within these walls, something even more enduring than earth and wood was being forged. An art form that would whisper tales of kings and gods across centuries, survive the ravages of fire and conquest, and leave an indelible mark on the world. The art of bronze casting. The story of Benin's bronzes is woven into the very fabric of its history. It's said the craft began around the 13th or 14th century, under the reign of a great Oba or king. Some legends say the skill traveled down from the neighboring Yoruba city of Ife, a place already renowned for its astonishingly lifelike metal sculptures. Others insist it was a homegrown genius, a master craftsman of Benin, who first unlocked the secret of turning humble clay molds and molten brass into breathtaking forms. Whatever its precise origin, the moment the craft took root in Benin, it became inseparable from the throne. The Oba, the sacred king, understood something profound. He knew that with rots, cloth fades, and spoken words can drift away like smoke on the wind. But bronze, bronze was different. Bronze was history made solid. It was power made permanent. It was memory made visible. Bronze could outlast wars, floods, and even fire itself. And so, the Obas began to commission these incredible works, not as mere decorations, but as vessels to carry their legacy, their victories, and their divine authority into eternity. The earliest bronzes we know of are heads. They are not portraits in the way we might think of them today, capturing every line and wrinkle of a specific person. Instead, they are symbols. They represent the eternal office of kingship, the spiritual weight of leadership. These heavy, dignified heads were placed on royal altars, memorials to past Obas. Imagine a sacred space in the palace, dimly lit by torches, where these bronze faces stood as silent guardians. Towering behind them were magnificent elephant tusks, intricately carved with spirals of history and ritual. With the crowning of each new Oba, new bronzes were commissioned, forging a tangible, unbreakable chain that linked the living king to the long line of his deified ancestors. It was a statement. The king is gone, but the kingship endures forever. As the centuries rolled on and the kingdom of Benin grew in power and influence, so too did the artistry of its casters evolve. The early works possess a beautiful, restrained quality, simple shapes, clean lines, a powerful symmetry. But as we move into the 15th and 16th centuries, the golden age of Benin, you can feel the confidence of the artists soar. They began to create magnificent relief plaques, rectangular panels bursting with detail, telling the stories of their world. These plaques transformed the royal palace. They were nailed to the massive wooden pillars that supported the palace roofs, turning the corridors and courtyards into a shimmering, metallic chronicle. Imagine walking through those halls. Every step you took would be surrounded by scenes of court life, of sacred ceremonies, of triumphant battles. You would see warriors clad in leopard skin tunics, their shields and spears held at the ready. You'd see court officials, musicians, and even foreign visitors from distant lands, identifiable by their long hair and distinct hats. The palace itself became a living gallery, a history book written in bronze, where the people of Benin could see their own power, their culture, and their place in the world reflected back at them in gleaming detail. Let's pause here for a moment and really soak that in. We're not just talking about art, we're talking about an entire symbolic language. The symbolism in these plaques ran incredibly deep. Leopards appear frequently, powerful and poised. Why? Because the leopard was the king of the forest, a perfect metaphor for the Oba's own strength and authority. You'll see figures adorned with intricate coral beads, a sign of immense wealth and divine favor granted by Olokon, the god of the sea. Weapons aren't just tools of war, they are emblems of power and the right to rule. Every detail, from the pattern on a soldier's garment to the curve of a queen mother's necklace, spoke of hierarchy, social order, and the spiritual beliefs that held the kingdom together. For the ordinary person, the art was a spectacle of breathtaking beauty. For the members of the court, it was history encoded, a reminder of their duties and lineage. And for the Oba himself, it was divine proof, tangible evidence that his rule was sanctioned by both the gods above and the ancestors below. This incredible artistic tradition was a closely guarded secret, passed down through generations. It was a craft that demanded immense skill and dedication. Fathers taught their sons. Masters took on apprentices, guiding them through the complex lost wax casting process. The Casters Guild, the Igan Iranwan, ensured that the sacred techniques never left its workshops. They weren't just metal workers, they were conduits of history, bearing the immense responsibility of preserving the kingdom's soul. Over time, their artistry reached astonishing heights. They could capture lifelike expressions, render the most intricate patterns of beads and cloth, and create realistic depictions of animals and people, all in the unforgiving medium of metal. This wasn't just labor. It was a spiritual calling, a duty carried with immense pride, and so, by the 16th century, the world within the palace walls glowed with bronze. The air in the city must have been thick with the smoke from the foundries, a constant reminder of the creative energy that fueled the kingdom. That smoke, rising into the West African sky, was like a whisper to the gods and to the future, a declaration for all time. Here, in Benin, we remember. Here, we endure. The faces of kings, the stories of battles, the essence of a civilization, all captured, all preserved, all immortalized in bronze. We've seen how this incredible art form was born from a need to make memory permanent. We've seen how it was intrinsically linked to the power of the Orba, serving as a bridge between the living and the dead. And we've watched as the art evolved, turning the royal palace into a magnificent, shimmering history book that told the epic story of the Kingdom of Benin. As the smoke from the casters' furnaces rose into the skies of Benin, their fame began to drift further than they could have ever imagined. Beyond the thick forests, beyond the protective moats and walls, beyond the red earth paths that led into the city. Stories of Benin's artistry began to spread along trade routes like whispered songs. The bronzes, so heavy with symbolism and radiant with power, were not destined to stay hidden forever. The 15th and 16th centuries were an age of encounter. From the vast Atlantic coast, Portuguese sailors, driven by the winds and by ambition, found their way to the Gulf of Guinea. They came first in search of pepper, ivory, and slaves. But soon they found something else, a kingdom that was organized, magnificent and overflowing with an artistic tradition unlike anything they had ever seen. The Portuguese brought with them brass manilais horseshoe-shaped ingots of copper alloy. They had no idea that these simple trade objects would become the very lifeblood of Benin's art. To the Europeans, these manillas were simply currency, a means to an end. But to the casters of Benin, they were raw potential, waiting to be transformed by fire and skill into sacred history. A simple bracelet-shaped lump of metal could become an Orba's head, immortalized in stunning detail. A trinket intended for trade would be reborn as a warrior's armor, forever engraved in relief on a palace plaque. The arrival of these manillas ensured that the furnaces of Benin never grew cold, fueling a golden age of creativity. And so, the bronzes began to multiply. With every new shipment of manillas, The casters pushed their art further. They experimented with finer details, created larger and more ambitious plaques, and constantly refined their techniques. It was as if this foreign trade had poured gasoline onto the fire of their creativity. The guild worked with renewed purpose, their workshops bustling with activity as they melted, poured, and polished. The increased supply of metal didn't just mean more art. It meant better art, more complex art. The casters could now take risks, attempting larger-than-life figures and intricate patterns that would have been too costly before. The palace walls, once adorned with a select number of masterpieces, were now becoming a sprawling gallery of history, each new plaque adding another chapter to the kingdom's story. The Portuguese were utterly astonished by what they saw. They arrived expecting a land of savages, as their prejudiced minds had imagined. Instead, they found a city laid out with straight, wide roads, bustling markets, and a palace complex more organized and grand than many they had seen back in Europe. One visitor wrote back home in amazement, saying, "The city of Benin is greater than Lisbon. The houses are large, the streets straight, and the people governed with great discipline." It was a reality that shattered their preconceptions. But more than anything, they marveled at the bronzes. How could these people, whom they considered outsiders, cast metal with such incredible mastery? The lifelike faces, the perfect proportions, the impossibly smooth polished rivaled, and in many cases, surpassed much of the art known in Europe at the time. Traders began to carry back small works, showing them off as curiosities, as undeniable proof of a sophisticated and powerful kingdom hidden deep in the forests of Africa. The fame of Benin's art, however, did not rest on beauty alone. It was inseparable from ritual. Every single piece had a function, a purpose. They were created to honor ancestors, to decorate the sacred walls of the palace, or to be used in important ceremonies. A bronze plaque wasn't just an ornament. It was a frozen moment of ritual life, placed within the palace to remind both the king and his subjects of their place in the divine order of things. During grand palace ceremonies, the bronzes would gleam in the flickering torchlight. Their figures seemed to move as shadows danced across their surfaces. Warriors struck their poses eternally. Courtiers bowed forever in respect, and the Orba stood in everlasting dignity, his divine authority captured in metal. To the people of Benin, these bronzes were alive. They were carriers of memory and keepers of power. Each piece held a story, a prayer, a connection to the spiritual world that was as real and tangible as the metal it was made from. As more Europeans visited, the word spread across the continent. Dutch traders, English explorers, and later the French all wrote about Benin's astounding artistry. For them, the bronzes became proof that Africa was not some barren continent devoid of civilization. And yet, their admiration was tangled with greed. To them, beauty was not something to honor, but something to acquire. It was a commodity, a trophy to be taken. Still, in those centuries before the eventual conquest, the fame of the bronzes brought a strange kind of respect. Diplomats from Europe sought alliances with Benin's rulers. They would present gifts of firearms and fine textiles. And in return, they received ivory, pepper, and occasionally a work of bronze as a sign of goodwill. The Obers, wise in the arts of diplomacy, carefully balanced trade with pride. They engaged with the newcomers, but never allowed their kingdom to be seen as inferior. They met the Europeans as equals, rulers of a powerful, self-assured nation. And all the while, inside the city, the casters continued their work with quiet devotion. They knew their bronzes were now admired far beyond their homeland, but they never lost sight of their sacred task. Their furnaces still smoked for the ancestors, for for the Orba, and for the people of Benin. If foreigners admired their works, that was well and good. But to the guild, the true audience was, and always would be, the gods and the spirits who watched over every single casting. Their work was an act of faith, not a performance for an international market. By the 17th century, the bronzes had become the kingdom's calling card. To mention Benin was to speak of fierce warriors, massive walls, and magnificent bronzes. Even without visiting, people in far-off lands began to whisper of this mysterious city, whose art was said to rival that of the ancient Greeks and Romans. The kingdom had become a legend, its artistic reputation preceding it across the known world. And yet, for all this growing fame, the bronzes remained tied to one fundamental truth. They belonged to Benin. They belonged to its palace, to its rituals, to its people. They were not commodities to be sold at market, not souvenirs to be traded freely. They were history bound in metal, and history is not something one gives away lightly. They were the soul of the kingdom, cast in a form that was meant to last forever. But the world was changing. As Europe's hunger for empire grew, so too did its hunger for the treasures of Benin. What began as a relationship of trade and cautious respect would, in time, turn to fire and fury. The very beauty that brought Benin fame would also attract the forces that sought to possess it. For centuries, the city of Benin stood proud. Imagine its walls, tall and formidable, its moats deep, and at its heart a palace buzzing with courtiers, dancers, warriors, and above all, art. For generations, master casters had dedicated their lives to fire, sweat, and ritual, filling the Orba's palace with magnificent bronzes that gleamed in the torchlight like captured suns. For hundreds of years, these bronzes were more than just objects. They were the guardians of the kingdom's stories, its history forged in metal. But the dawn of 1897 would change everything. It all began with empire. By the late 19th century, the scramble for Africa was in full swing. Britain, France, and Germany were carving up the continent, turning territories into pieces on a global chessboard of power. The Niger Delta, with its rich palm oil reserves and vital trade routes, became a prize Britain was determined to claim. And at the center of this region stood Benin, still proud, still independent, and unwilling to bow to foreign powers. The ruler at the time, Oba Ovenramwan Nagbiasi, was a man of both strength and caution. He inherited not just the throne, but the immense responsibility of resisting European encroachment. The British, however, were growing impatient. They demanded more trade, more access, and they wanted it on their terms, not as honored guests, but as rulers. When the OBA hesitated, diplomacy quickly soured into threats. In January 1897, a British delegation led by acting Consul General James Phillips set out for Benin City. They ignored warnings that their visit, happening during a sacred festival, would be seen as hostile. They claimed their mission was peaceful, but they came with soldiers, weapons, and an air of arrogance that was impossible to miss. The Edo chiefs saw through the deception. The delegation was ambushed outside the city, and most of the British party was killed. For Britain, this was the justification they had been waiting for. News of the massacre spread like wildfire across the empire, framed as an act of savage barbarism. Public outrage was stoked, and within weeks, the British Navy assembled a full-scale punitive expedition. In February 1897, thousands of British soldiers marched on Benin. They were armed with the latest military technology, rifles, devastating Maxim machine guns, and fire. They faced Benin's defenders, warriors armed with spears, bows, and a courage that was second to none. But courage, however fierce, could not stop bullets. The city of Benin, which had stood for centuries, fell quickly under the overwhelming storm of firepower. Streets that once echoed with the lively calls of the market now rang with gunfire. Homes that had sheltered generations of families went up in flames. The Oba's palace, the very heart of Benin, was systematically looted and then set ablaze. The treasures that the casters had poured their souls into for centuries, the intricate plaques, the lifelike heads, the detailed reliefs, were ruthlessly stripped from the palace walls and altars. Soldiers hastily stuffed thousands of priceless artworks into crates. Some were shipped to London within weeks, and sold at auction, the proceeds used to pay for the very expedition that had stolen them. These bronzes, which had been vibrant, living parts of ritual and ceremony, were suddenly reduced to trophies of conquest. Once carriers of spirit and history, they were now displayed in European drawing rooms, museums, and private collections. London, Berlin, Paris, New York, each major Western city gained fragments of Benin's soul. The plaques that had once lined the pillars of a king's palace now stood silent in sterile glass cases, illuminated by foreign lights. The Guild of Casters, the keepers of a sacred tradition, was shattered. Their workshops were destroyed, their furnaces smashed, their sacred spaces desecrated. For centuries, they had endured the fire to create enduring beauty. Now, a different kind of fire had consumed their entire world. For the people of Benin, the invasion was more than a physical attack. It was a profound spiritual violation. The bronzes were not mere decorations. They were vessels of memory, guardians of lineage, a direct link to the ancestors. Their loss was like a deep wound carved into the soul of the kingdom. The elders whispered that their ancestors had been stolen, that the spirits had been torn from their rightful resting places. Oba Ovenramwan was eventually captured, publicly humiliated, and exiled to Calabar, far from the city he once ruled. His defeat marked the end of Benin's independence. The ancient kingdom was absorbed into the growing British colony that would become Nigeria. Yet, even in exile, even amidst the ruins, the story of the bronzes did not end. The very objects meant to symbolize Benin's humiliation became its most powerful testimony. Europeans, try as they might, could not look upon the bronzes without acknowledging their sheer brilliance. In museums across the world, visitors whispered in awe at the incredible craftsmanship. Art scholars compared them to the finest works of classical antiquity from Greece and Rome. But for the people of Benin, they were, and always would be, more than just art. They were stolen ancestors. As the decades passed, the bronzes became potent symbols of both devastating loss and incredible resilience. Edo oral history, passed down from one generation to the next, kept alive the memory of the casters, the sacred rituals, and the city's former greatness. Though scattered across the globe, the bronzes continued to speak. They told stories of the Obia's court, the pride of the warriors, and the sacred rituals of fire. They could not be silenced. Today, more than a century after that fiery destruction, the Benin Bronzes remain among the most fiercely debated works of art in the world. The calls for their repatriation, for their return home, grow louder with each passing year. Some have already made the journey back, carried across the seas to the land of their birth. But thousands of others remain in foreign museums, standing as dual symbols of an empire's greed and Africa's undeniable genius. The invasion of 1897 was intended to break the spirit of Benin forever. Instead, it inadvertently made its art immortal not as colonial trophies, but as lasting, powerful witnesses to the resilience of a people who forged their history in fire. In the heart of the ancient kingdom of Benin, within the cool shadows of the palace walls, a unique form of history was being forged. Not in books, not in scrolls, but in metal. The bronzes of Benin were not merely objects, they were memory itself. Each plaque, each head, each intricate relief carried within it the weight of centuries, the breath of kings, and the whispers of ancestors. Here, casters worked through the nights, guided by fire, faith, and an unbroken lineage, transforming raw, molten metal into vessels of history. The Orba of Benin was more than a king. He was a living bridge between the earthly world and the spiritual realm. And every bronze created under his reign was a mirror of his power, a testament to his divine authority. Look at the warriors carved in relief. You can see the loyalty and courage in their expressions. Court attendants, musicians, priests all were immortalized in metal, their forms echoing gestures known to everyone who walked the palace halls. Through bronze, the story of Benin was told without a single written word. Yet each piece spoke volumes. For the casters, the men who mastered this incredible art, bronze was memory made material. The intense heat of the molten brass and copper wasn't just a physical danger, it was a spiritual transformation. They believed the alloy itself carried the echo of the artist's intent, the prayers of the Orba, and the stories of generations past. Every single strike of a hammer, each careful pour into a waiting mold, was an act of binding history into the very fabric of the metal. These plaques weren't just decorations. They were the kingdom's official records. They commemorated battles won, territories governed, and alliances forged. To look at a plaque was to step into a living history, to almost hear the echoes of drums, see the sway of dancers, and feel the solemnity of the court. The artistry was deliberate. Nothing was accidental. Every pattern, every line, every figure was a word in a narrative older than the walls themselves. Oral tradition and the bronzes were seamlessly intertwined. Storytellers would use the images on the plaques as cues, recalling the names of kings, the dates of ceremonies, and the heroic deeds of ancestors. In evening gatherings, children learned their history not just by listening, but by watching, their eyes tracing the figures preserved in bronze. The casters themselves were teachers, their art guiding the memory of the entire kingdom. Bronze was both a teacher and a testament, a medium that demanded attention, respect, and careful observation. The Orba's divine authority was symbolized everywhere. You'd see leopard motifs, coral beads, and ceremonial regalia. These were more than just beautiful details. They were markers of cosmic order and social hierarchy. The casters communicated the sacred through metal. The warriors held up in relief were not simply soldiers. They were guardians of the Orba's divine will. The priests weren't just clerics. They were conduits for ancestral voices, their presence in bronze amplifying their spiritual power. The very act of casting was a ritual. Fire was used to purify. The rising smoke was thought to carry prayers. And the metallic scent mingled with incense and palm oil to create a sacred atmosphere. While working, casters would intone the names of kings, ancestors, and spirits, a sacred chant to guide the molten metal, ensuring it flowed exactly as intended. Mistakes were costly, not just materially, but spiritually. A flawed bronze could disrupt the memory of a great king or misrepresent a sacred ritual. For these artists, precision was a form of devotion. Mastery was a sacred duty. And this metal didn't just capture history, it captured emotion. If you look closely at a warrior's eyes or the gentle curve of a musician's fingers on a drum, you can feel it. You can sense the tension of a battle, the unrestrained joy of a festival, or the deep solemnity of a religious offering. These plaques were not cold, inert objects. They breathed with history, with emotion, and with the very rhythm of a people bound to one another by craft. devotion, and a shared memory forged in fire. To collectors of Benin Bronzes today, they might be seen as stunning artifacts, masterpieces of a lost art. But to the Edo people, they were, and still are, living chronicles. Each head, each plaque, was a node in a vast, interconnected network of remembrance. When warriors, nobles, or priests were depicted, it wasn't just their likeness that mattered. It was their lineage, their actions, and the stories they represented. This is why to remove a bronze from the palace was to do more than steal an object. It was to tear a piece out of history, to sever a thread in the web that connected the past to the present. This artistry was also cumulative, a living tradition. Younger casters learned by copying the masters, but also by innovating within the established traditions. Molds were passed down through generations, retaining classic patterns while allowing for small, deliberate deviations that told a new story or added a new layer to an old one. So, each bronze was both a record of history and a living document, capable of growth and adaptation, yet always faithful to its deep roots. In ceremonial terms, these bronzes were indispensable. Major events like festivals, enthronements, and sacred rituals simply could not proceed without them. The OBA's authority was visually reinforced through plaques depicting his victories, divine symbols, and honored ancestors. Warriors going into battle wore patterns on their shields and banners that echoed those found in the bronze reliefs. Priests chanted to images they had seen carved from memory and fire. The kingdom of Benin was both a physical and symbolic reality, its entire structure intertwined with the metal that lined its palace walls. The casters and historians of Benin understood the subtle messages embedded in each piece. Political statements, signs of divine favor, and even warnings to enemies were all encoded in the art. The composition of a scene, the orientation of a figure, and the scale of the elements communicated as clearly as any spoken word. Bronze was a language, and the entire city of Benin was its classroom, its museum, and its most sacred space. Even after the British invasion of 1897 scattered the bronzes across the globe, their story endured. Scholars, collectors, and art lovers could marvel at the incredible technical skill, but for the Edo people, their meaning never changed. They continued to see lineage, devotion, and divine order. The power of oral history ensured that every cast figure, every plaque, every sculpted head continued to speak, its voice carrying across oceans and decades. This story of bronze as memory teaches us a profound truth about art and culture. It is both fragile and eternal. A single plaque might be melted, stolen, or hidden away, but the knowledge, the intent, and the ritual behind it can persist. Through storytelling, apprenticeship, and a continued practice of ceremony, the spirit of the kingdom of Benin survived. The memory, forged in bronze, outlived walls, wars, and empires, proving that true history resides not just in objects, but in the hearts and minds of the people who create them. In the workshops of ancient Benin, the radiant glow of molten bronze was never a solitary light. It mingled with the sweet, heavy scent of incense, with smoke curling from small clay lamps, and with the silent power of charms placed carefully around the work area. The master casters and their apprentices carried amulets tied with leather cords, small pouches filled with herbs, and inscribed papers meant to guard them from the ever-present dangers of their craft. This art was perilous. Fire could maim, molten metal could sear flesh, and a moment's carelessness could be fatal. But within these rituals lay something far deeper than mere protection. It was a connection, a sacred link to their ancestors, to the divine authority of the Orba, and to the cosmic forces that guided the entire kingdom. The amulets they wore were incredibly diverse. Some were intricately carved from ivory, others forged from iron or copper, while many were fashioned from beads, each material imbued with its own specific meaning. If you look closely at some of the bronze plaques and heads, you might notice small cross-like symbols. These weren't Christian crosses, but powerful indigenous markers of balance, of crossroads between the physical and spiritual worlds, and of profound spiritual protection. As the casters moved around the clay molds, they would whisper prayers or invoke the names of their ancestors, ensuring that every single pore of molten metal was blessed. A mistake, a flaw in the final casting, wasn't just a technical error. It could be interpreted as a spiritual warning. In the art of Benin, precision and piety were inseparable. Subtly, Islamic influences also found their way into these sacred rituals. Quranic verses, painstakingly inscribed on leather and tucked into pouches or hidden within the folds of ceremonial cloth, merged seamlessly with the indigenous spiritual beliefs. The fusion was a delicate dance. Metal was the medium, fire was the purifier, and a rich tapestry of symbols served as the guides. These protective inscriptions were never meant for public display. They were secret guardians, personal shields, holding back misfortune, disease, and the wrath of angered spirits. The casters and their apprentices learned to honor both spiritual realms, weaving two distinct worlds into a single, breathtaking act of creation. The fire itself was a paradox, both a source of immense danger and a powerful protector. The molten bronze reached temperatures that could liquefy stone, and it demanded absolute respect. Casters approached the furnace with ritual words, with careful, deliberate gestures, and in a state of humble silence. Any distraction, any lapse in concentration could invite disaster. And yet, it was within that very same fire that memory was forged and art was born. The fire purified the metal, it transformed raw materials into works of genius, and it protected the sacred intent of the artist. Let's pause here for a moment. Imagine the fire crackling softly, the day's work done, as we rest beneath the vast, star-filled African sky. The symbols of protection extended far beyond personal amulets and secret inscriptions. Many of these protective motifs were incorporated directly into the very bronzes themselves. If you examine the plaques, you'll find leaping leopards, stylized snakes, and abstract geometric patterns, all acting as silent, powerful guardians. Each plaque, each commemorative head, carried not just a story, but a shield. When these magnificent pieces adorned the palace walls, they offered a dual blessing. They preserved memory while providing spiritual protection for the Oba, for the people, and for the entire city of Benin. Even the smallest tools of the trade bore immense significance. Hammers, chisels, and molds were often consecrated, blessed before their first use. A hammer passed down through generations of casters was far more than just wood and iron. It was a talisman, a bearer of ancestral skill, and a vessel of accumulated prayers. Apprentices were taught more than just technique. They were initiated into the rituals of protection, the deep respect for fire, and the complex spiritual language of symbols. Protective fire wasn't merely a metaphor. During a ceremonial casting, the master casters would circle the furnace, sprinkling water, grains, or crushed herbs into the flames to invoke ancestral guidance and blessing. The smoke that rose from the hearth was believed to carry messages to the spirit world, while the shimmering sheen of the molten metal reflected not just the caster's skill, but his spiritual alignment. Each piece, cast under such strict ritual conditions, was thought to carry its own guardian force, capable of bestowing luck, protection, or divine favor upon the person it commemorated. The crosses and abstract signs embedded in plaques or ceremonial objects also served to guide behavior. They marked certain spaces as sacred, warned observers of unseen dangers, and symbolized the essential unity of the earthly and spiritual worlds. Even the Oba, the divine king, understood this intricate language. He knew that misaligned or improperly used motifs could offend the spirits or the ancestors, potentially bringing misfortune upon the palace and his people. Let's pause here again. Listen to the fire's gentle song, a constant presence, as we find ourselves resting once more beneath the stars. Beyond the grand palace walls, these protective rituals and symbols traveled with the Bronzes wherever they went. Warriors carried specially commissioned plaques with them on military campaigns, believing they offered a shield against harm. Priests used the commemorative heads in ceremonies to connect with the divine. Traders who transported these precious artworks across rivers and through dense forests knew that the amulets hidden within the hollow of a statue or tucked into the folds of a bronze figure, S-cloth, ensured safe passage. These safeguards were a constant reminder that in Benin, art was alive. It had agency, it held memory, and it possessed the power to shield just as effectively as it could record history. The artistry was always deliberate and deeply layered. Protective symbols might be incredibly subtle, almost imperceptible to an untrained eye. But to those initiated in Benin's sacred arts, every line, every curve, and every indentation conveyed a specific intention. The intricate patterns served both aesthetic and spiritual purposes, guiding the observer to understand not only who asterisk was depicted, but how they were protected by the spiritual forces woven into the very fabric of the metal. This sacred ecosystem of fire, amulets, and symbols was intertwined with the everyday life of the casting workshops. Apprentices learned the virtues of humility, patience, and devotion. They memorized prayers, they repeated protective gestures until they became second nature, and they absorbed the steady, sacred rhythm of the work. In this way, the creation of art in Benin was also an act of education, a living history lesson, and a profound ritual all at once. Even after the tragic looting of the city in 1897, when the Bronzes were scattered across the globe, these protective rituals were never entirely lost. The stories of the casters, the prayers they whispered, and the meaning of the symbols survived in a powerful oral tradition. Edo elders recounted them to their children and grandchildren, ensuring that the knowledge of this spiritual craftsmanship would outlive the physical objects themselves. Let's pause one last time. The fire crackles softly, a timeless sound, as we rest and reflect under the immensity of the night sky. The protective fire also served as a moral compass for the casters. They were constantly reminded that hubris, disrespect, or arrogance could bring calamity. A caster who approached his work with greed or a proud heart risked accidents, both physical and spiritual. The rituals, the chants, and the amulets reinforced the essential virtues of humility and reverence. The metal was a vessel for memory, but it was also a mirror, reflecting the true character of its maker. As the newly cast pieces cooled, the protective forces embedded within them did not dissipate. Instead, they became silent witnesses, eternal guardians of memory and history. Each Benin bronze was, therefore, a multi-layered entity. It was a work of art, a historical archive, a ritual object, and a powerful talisman. To the people of Benin, these sculptures were not just beautiful objects. They were alive with spiritual energy, and the workshops where they were born were, and remain, truly sacred spaces. The walls of Benin's royal palace once gleamed with bronze. Each plaque, each head, Each intricate figure told a story of powerful orbers and fierce warriors, of sacred ceremonies and hard-won victories, of a divine lineage intertwined with mortal history. But in 1897, a catastrophe struck. The city faced a calamity that would scatter these priceless treasures across oceans and continents. The British punitive expedition, fueled by colonial ambition, descended upon Benin City. They burned, they looted, and they dismantled. The workshops, where generations of master casters had labored, were reduced to ashes. And the bronzes, some of which were centuries old, were stolen, carried away as spoils of war to London, to Berlin, and to New York. The impact was not just physical, it was profoundly spiritual. The casters had embedded prayers, protective charms, and sacred symbols into every single work. When the bronzes were torn from the palace walls, a vital connection to ancestors, to protective spirits, and to history itself was severed. Families mourned more than just art. They mourned the loss of continuity, of identity, and of memory itself. Yet, even in the smoking ruins, the stories of these sacred objects persisted, carried forward by elders who whispered their tales around evening firesides, determined that they would not be forgotten. These bronzes were never intended to be mere decoration. They were historical records, sacred objects, and the ultimate symbols of royal authority. Each piece represented a careful, deliberate balance between breathtaking artistry, deep spirituality, and collective memory. The plaques narrated wars, political marriages, diplomatic missions, and religious ceremonies. The heads captured the divine presence of the ABAs, and the rituals performed during their creation ensured the kingdom's protection and legitimacy. To lose them wasn't just to lose art. It was to lose a part of Benin's very soul. As the bronzes arrived in Europe, collectors and museums marveled at their beauty. They were seen as objects of admiration, symbols of an exotic sophistication, or simply proof of a powerful African kingdom's incredible technical mastery. But far from Benin, these objects could not speak their original language. They couldn't convey the protective rituals they embodied, and they could no longer serve the Orba or the Edo people as they were intended. Their true meaning was lost in translation, locked behind glass cases in foreign lands. Let's pause here for a moment. Imagine the fire crackling softly as we rest beneath the stars, listening to the echoes of the past. The stories of the lost bronzes are intertwined with incredible tales of endurance and resilience. Edo elders recounted how the casters, even after their workshops were destroyed, continued their sacred work in secret. The knowledge of their techniques, the prayers, and the rituals, all of it was preserved, passed down through apprentices, family lines, and oral teaching. Each time a story was told by the fireside, it was an act of reclamation, a quiet but powerful act of resistance against the erasure of history. These tales often followed the journeys of the bronzes themselves. Traded, sold, or gifted, they found new homes in European collections, public museums, and private estates. Some were studied by scholars, their forms analyzed and catalogued. Others languished in obscurity, their profound significance hidden behind a simple veneer of artistic curiosity. This separation from their homeland only added another layer of mystique and melancholy to their story, making it as much about absence as it is about presence. Yet, the mystery of the lost bronzes is not simply a story of displacement. It is a story of an ongoing dialogue, a continuing struggle. Today, powerful Edo voices are advocating for restitution, for the return of their cultural patrimony, and for a global acknowledgement of historical injustice. Scholars, curators, and governments now debate the complex issues of ownership, ethics, and the proper homes for these world treasures. And every single bronze that is recovered, every story that is retold, strengthens the continuity of Edo identity and reclaims another fragment of their spiritual and historical integrity. Even in exile, the bronzes remain incredibly powerful. Removed from their original context, they still speak volumes about craftsmanship, ritual, and authority. Yet their greatest power can only be realized when they are understood within Benin itself, within the palace walls, under the gaze of the ancestors, and among the descendants of the very people who first shaped them from fire and metal. Let's pause here again. Let the fire die down a little, and just feel the weight of that history as the night deepens around us. Today, in workshops all across Edo lands, a new generation of casters is working to revive the old techniques. They study fragments, copies, and photographs, seeking to understand not just the technical precision, but also the ritual significance of the original works. Protective charms, the rhythm of the forge, and the sacred invocation of ancestors are being taught alongside hammer strikes and the pouring of molds. Each reproduction becomes a powerful act of memory, a bridge connecting centuries, and a profound reclaiming of heritage. The mystery only deepens when we consider the stories of bronzes that disappeared entirely. Some were likely melted down, lost to the chaos of war, or sold into private hands without any record. Here, oral histories fill in the gaps, offering names, events, and preserving the spirit of the casters who first created them. Children learn that the bronzes are not just objects. They are living testimonies to Edo ingenuity, devotion, and unbreakable resilience. Even the simple act of telling these stories around an evening fire reaffirms cultural memory. As the smoke rises towards the stars, elders recount which bronzes depicted which oba, which rituals were observed during their creation, and which charms were used to protect both the artisan and their art. Each retelling is a ritual of preservation in itself, ensuring that the knowledge embedded in the bronze survives the centuries, the wars, and the displacement. Through this rich narrative, you begin to understand the extraordinary endurance of Benin culture. Even in the face of immense colonial disruption, the stories of the bronzes, the rituals of the casters, and the devotion of the Edo communities continue to thrive. The lost bronzes, while physically absent for so long, remain vibrantly present in memory, in identity, and in the living pulse of ongoing cultural practices. The court of Benin City was far more than just a political hub. It was a vibrant crucible of culture, power, and artistry. Within its walls, the Obi's presence was both commanding and divine. Every decree he issued, every ritual he performed, didn't just shape governance, it profoundly shaped the art of the kingdom. Imagine the bronze casters, their hands and minds steeped in the rhythm of the forge and the invocation of ancestors. With every strike of the hammer, they felt the immense weight of this authority. They were artisans, yes, but they were also subjects, bound to the divine mandate of the Orba. Royal commissions were never casual requests. They were sacred duties, a command from a god-king. Each plaque, each sculpted head, each ceremonial object had to honor not only the living Orba, but also the ancestral spirits watching over the kingdom. A single, minor mistake could be interpreted as a grave slight against both king and ancestors, a dangerous misstep. So, the casters worked with meticulous, almost fanatical precision, constantly balancing their incredible technical skill with an ever-present spiritual responsibility. The fire roaring in the forge wasn't just a tool to melt metal. It was a sacred medium, a conduit through which prayers, protection, and homage were channeled and fused into the enduring form of bronze. The court didn't just dictate asterisk what asterisk was made. It dictated asterisk how asterisk it was made. Sacred rituals guided every single step of the casting process. Before even thinking of handling the molten metal, casters would purify themselves with water, palm oil, and whispered prayers. Protective charms and incantations were carefully placed near the clay molds, warding off malevolent forces and ensuring a successful cast. This beautiful, seamless blending of spiritual observance and technical mastery is what truly defines the unique artistry of the Benin Bronzes. Often, these commissions were directly tied to political necessity. A newly crowned Oba might order a series of plaques depicting the glorious victories of his predecessors, a powerful visual statement to legitimize his own reign. Royal shrines required a constant supply of sculpted heads to honor the ancestors and ensure their continued favor for the kingdom. When diplomats or envoys visited the court, the dazzling display of bronzes served as undeniable evidence of Benin's wealth, sophistication, and divine sanction. In every single piece, the Oba's power radiated outwards, and with it, the heavy, sacred responsibility of the caster. The Oba's influence rippled out far beyond the palace gates. Local chiefs and wealthy nobles also frequently requested works of their own, either to display their loyalty to the crown or to commemorate significant events in their own lives. While these commissions could bring an artisan great prestige and financial reward, they also carried considerable risks. Displeasing a patron, even a minor one, could tarnish a caster's reputation or, worse, invite serious political consequences. Yet, the artisans navigated these complex social and political demands with remarkable skill, constantly balancing obedience with their own creativity and reverence with their innate ingenuity. These artisans were highly respected, but they were not free. They were the keepers of knowledge passed down through generations, the closely guarded secrets of lost wax casting, of precise alloy ratios, of the correct ritual invocations. Yet, they operated under constant, watchful scrutiny. The guild system ensured that this technical mastery remained within trusted families, preserving both the skill and the spiritual significance of the craft. Apprentices spent years just observing, memorizing, and practicing under the intense gaze of the masters. They learned that the art of bronze was absolutely inseparable from the intricate, often treacherous, web of courtly power. Every bronze that left the workshop carried multiple layers of meaning. On one level, it was a historical document, depicting warriors in battle, elaborate ceremonies, and important diplomatic encounters. But, on another, deeper level, it served vital ritual purposes, protecting the Obe from harm, maintaining cosmic balance in the universe, or honoring the ever-watchful ancestors. The casters understood these layers intimately. They felt the weight of responsibility not just to their craft, but to their entire society and to their gods. The process itself demanded immense patience. The molten metal had to reach a precise temperature, the clay molds had to be flawless, and every single stroke of a hammer or carving tool had to be deliberate and perfect. A single flaw, a tiny crack, or imperfection could mar the entire narrative of the piece or diminish its sacred power. The casters moved slowly, deliberately, fully aware that it was the sacred union of time, fire, and precision that gave life to the bronze. Of course, the shifting sands of court politics also influenced the art. Ambitious Obas commissioned works to assert their dominance over rivals, to honor new alliances, or to commemorate bitter conflicts. The incredible bronze heads captured the likenesses of kings, chiefs, and other important figures, immortalizing them for centuries to come. The famous plaques illustrated stories that educated future generations and served as a constant reminder to all citizens of the OBA's power and wisdom. Each piece was a fusion of politics, spirituality, and craft, a tangible expression of Benin's complex courtly world. Yet, it's crucial to remember that these artisans were more than just tools of the palace. They were interpreters of power, in subtle ways through their technique, their evolving style, and their quiet innovations. The casters could infuse their own personality and spirit into their work. Though bound by tradition, their hands expressed a profound level of skill, creativity, and personal devotion. They were both servants and co-creators, partners with the Orba in the sacred enterprise of preserving memory and authority in bronze. The Orba's commands were exacting, but his patronage was also protective. It guaranteed the casters a steady supply of materials, as well as food, shelter, and honor for their families. They moved within a structured hierarchy, respected for their incredible knowledge, yet constrained by their duty. The Orba's favor could elevate a master caster to a position of great prominence. Conversely, a single misstep could diminish a family's standing for generations. It was this delicate, precarious balance that shaped not only the art, but the very society it reflected. Through decades and centuries, the royal court nurtured this incredible bronze artistry, ensuring its continuity. Apprentices became masters, rituals were carefully preserved, and the spirit of each Oba lived on through the magnificent bronzes they commissioned. Even during periods of crisis, when external forces threatened the very existence of the workshops, the knowledge embedded in the artisans' minds and hands endured. This resilience safeguarded the priceless legacy of Benin's art, allowing us to witness its power and beauty today. Beyond the walls of the Orba's palace, the city of Benin thrummed with the rhythm of commerce. Markets overflowed with goods, palm oil, ivory, pepper, cloth, and, most crucially for the casters, brass manillas from Portuguese traders. These small, curved ingots of metal were the lifeblood of bronze production. They were exchanged for the kingdom's finest works of art, the very currency of creativity. Without this steady influx of manillas, the casters simply could not melt, mold, or craft the delicate and powerful bronzes that have come to define Benin's legacy. It was a cycle of trade and creation, where metal from foreign shores was transformed into the cultural heart of an African empire. Artisans in Benin navigated a world of complex patronage. Royal commissions were the ultimate prize, ensuring both high status and financial security. But the OBA wasn't the only one commissioning art. Powerful merchants and wealthy patrons also demanded works that reflected their own influence and success. From local chiefs to foreign traders, each client required precision, beauty, and powerful symbolism. A plaque might be commissioned to commemorate a prosperous trading voyage, to celebrate a newly formed alliance, or to mark a generous donation to a local shrine. In every single piece, the caster had to balance the material demands of their client with the spiritual and aesthetic considerations that were deeply embedded in their culture. These trade networks extended far beyond Benin's immediate borders. First the Portuguese, then the Dutch, and later the British all sought the kingdom's extraordinary art and its natural wealth. Ships laden with European goods anchored along the Benin rivers, bringing exotic materials and, with them, global attention. The casters responded to this growing demand with incredible skill, creating works that would astonish foreign eyes while always adhering to the strict cultural codes of their own society. Each bronze piece became both a commodity and a story, a tangible object that bridged the worlds of commerce and culture of Africa and Europe. It was a conversation cast in metal. While the casters were deeply respected for their skills, they were also under immense pressure. Wealthy patrons didn't just purchase art. They expected excellence, speed, and, above all, a strict adherence to tradition. Every commission carried a potential risk. A flawed bronze could deeply offend a powerful chief, alienate a valuable trader, or even diminish the Ober's prestige indirectly. Because of this, casters worked in a state of intense focus, blending their technical mastery with ritual observance. They were acutely aware that their creations were not just beautiful objects, they were both spiritual and economic instruments, holding the power to build relationships or to break them. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Within the guild system, the secrets of the craft were guarded carefully. Knowledge of making the perfect alloy, of preparing the intricate molds, and of reciting the sacred incantations was passed down from master to apprentice. Young apprentices would observe their masters navigating delicate negotiations with merchants, witnessing firsthand how a skilled artisan could leverage their talent for social and economic mobility. While many craftsmen remained humble in public, some gained fame and recognition that reached far beyond the city gates. They were celebrated for producing works that impressed kings, traders, and visiting dignitaries alike. Their names whispered with respect in distant lands. Merchants often sponsored projects that would enhance their own prestige. A bronze head of a past Auber, a finely crafted plaque depicting a ceremonial feast, or a symbolic object for a shrine could all serve as undeniable proof of a patroness' wealth, their refined taste, and their spiritual devotion. In this way, the art of bronze casting became completely intertwined with commerce, politics, and religion. It was a tangible manifestation of Benin's power and its incredible cultural sophistication, with each piece telling a story of ambition, faith, and influence. The influx of Portuguese manillas was more than just a practical convenience. It was a powerful catalyst for cultural exchange. This European metal interacted directly with African tradition, fueling innovation while simultaneously demanding fidelity to ancestral forms. The casters adapted beautifully. They learned to blend these new materials with their old rituals, ensuring that even imported metal became a vessel for Benin's stories and its spiritual life. It was a delicate alchemy where the artisan's skill was both technical and deeply symbolic, transforming a foreign commodity into a sacred local icon. Patronage also extended into the subtle world of politics. Powerful chiefs and wealthy merchants could influence which workshops received the most lucrative commissions, which apprentices rose to the rank of master, and which casters enjoyed the favor of the Auber. Navigating these complex relationships required a sharp social intelligence just as much as it did metallurgical expertise. Casters often acted as intermediaries, skillfully translating the intentions of the royal court or the elite into physical form. They were mediators, standing at the crossroads of power, wealth, and the sacred duties of their craft. Their role was as much diplomatic as it was artistic. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The incredible artistry of the Benin Bronzes thrived precisely because of this intricate web of relationships. Casters were not isolated figures, working alone in a dusty workshop. They were central actors in a dynamic network of commerce, influence, and ritual. Their work carried the weight of material wealth, social reputation, and spiritual authority all at once. Every single commission, whether it came from the Auber himself or from a wealthy merchant, demanded a perfect balance of precision, creativity, and unwavering devotion. It was a high-stakes world where art was power. And even as external pressures mounted, more merchants arriving on their shores, foreign fascination with their art growing, and political tensions beginning to fluctuate, the guilds maintained order, continuity, and an uncompromising standard of quality. This powerful fusion of patronage, trade, and craft ensured that Benin's bronzes remained unmatched, both in their breathtaking technical skill and their profound cultural resonance. They stood as a testament to a society that had mastered the art of turning metal into meaning, and trade into tradition. Hello and welcome back. If you've been with us on this journey, you know the story of the rise and fall of the Kingdom of Benin, and the incredible artistry of its bronze casters. The fire in Benin City's workshops, set during the 1897 punitive expedition, has long since cooled. But its echoes endure. You can hear them in the rhythmic clang of hammer on bronze, smell them in the air thick with molten metal, and feel them in the stories passed from master to apprentice, generation after generation. The guilds, those ancient brotherhoods of artisans, survived conquest, looting, and profound disruption. They were the guardians of techniques so refined, so sacred, that they were considered a form of magic. Even after the British forces ransacked the city, destroyed the workshops, and scattered the priceless bronzes across the globe, the spirit of the casters, the very soul of their craft, could not be extinguished. It persisted, stubbornly, defiantly. And this legacy isn't something trapped in the amber of history books or confined behind the velvet ropes of museum galleries. It's alive. Walk through the bustling streets of modern Benin City and you'll find it. You'll see artisans, their hands steady and reverent, pouring liquid fire into molds, just as their ancestors did centuries ago. You might hear the soft murmur of traditional chants, words that have blessed this process for countless generations, echoing in workshops where old, well-worn tools lie next to newly forged plaques. Each piece they create, be it a commemorative head, a ceremonial plaque, or a sacred object, is a living, breathing link to a lineage that masterfully wove together the spiritual, the political, and the artistic into a single, unbreakable tapestry. This incredible continuity of craft is more than just skill. It's a powerful testament to the resilience and unshakable pride of the Edo people. Today's bronze casters stand at a fascinating crossroads, navigating the delicate balance between tradition and the demands of the modern world. It's a dual pressure that could crush a lesser art form, but here it seems to forge something new and powerful. Some artisans continue to fulfill their ancestral roles, crafting exquisite works for the royal court and local shrines, ensuring that the ceremonial heart of the kingdom continues to beat strongly. These pieces are not just art. They are integral parts of rituals and community life, imbued with deep spiritual significance. At the same time, others are adapting, reaching a global audience. They cater to international collectors, prestigious museums, and curious tourists, transforming ancient methods into contemporary masterpieces. These works carry a dual identity. They are rich with the cultural DNA of Benin, yet they also possess a commercial value that allows the craft to thrive economically. Through this adaptability, the art of casting maintains its relevance. It's a dynamic, evolving tradition that constantly reminds the world that the creativity, skill, and spirit of Benin are not relics of a bygone era. They are vibrant, respected, and very much alive today. The workshops hum with a new kind of energy, one that honors the past while confidently forging a future. The survival of these guilds is, frankly, remarkable when you consider the historical traumas they've endured. Imagine having the heart of your culture, thousands of irreplaceable masterpieces, violently ripped away. The loss of countless bronzes to colonial forces was a devastating blow. But it did not erase the knowledge held in the casters' minds and hands. It did not extinguish the deep, spiritual reverence for the craft itself. If anything, it ignited a quiet, unyielding determination, a resolve to remember, to rebuild, to continue. Masters today teach their apprentices far more than just the technical skills of metallurgy. They don't just show them how to mix the alloy of copper and tin, or how to gauge the perfect temperature of the furnace. They teach them how to honor the lineage they are now a part of. They pass down the oral histories, the epic stories of the Orbers, the kings and queens who built the kingdom. They instill in them the importance of maintaining the spiritual integrity of each and every work. The bronze, in their hands, becomes something more than a beautiful object. It becomes a vessel for memory, a voice for the ancestors. It is both sculpture and story, metal and spirit. Let's just pause here for a moment. Imagine us sitting together, the day's work done. The fire in the forge crackles softly, casting long shadows on the walls. Outside, the first stars begin to appear in the velvet sky. In this quiet moment, we can almost feel the weight and wisdom of the centuries settling around us. This craft, this legacy, also embodies profound lessons in patience and humility. Each bronze piece demands an immense investment of time. We're not talking about a few hours of work. We're talking about days, weeks, sometimes even months of painstaking, meticulous labor. From sculpting the initial clay model, to creating the wax form, to building the final mold, and finally, the fiery, dramatic pour every single step is critical. The casters understand, with an intimacy born of long practice, that one small miscalculation in the alloy's ratio, a fluctuation in the furnace temperature, a flaw in the mold's design could ruin everything. Months of labor could be lost in a single, heartbreaking moment. This profound patience mirrors the long, slow arc of history itself. It reflects the gradual forging of a society's identity, and the delicate, continuous effort required to preserve cultural memory against the erosion of time. In the careful, deliberate shaping of bronze, we see a metaphor for the careful shaping of Benin's own legacy. And across the globe, scattered in museums from London to Berlin, from New York back to Lagos, the original bronzes continue to tell their own stories of endurance. They stand as silent, elegant witnesses to history, to moments of incredible triumph and devastating tragedy. They speak of powerful kings and revered queens, of complex rituals and grand ceremonies. And above all, they speak of the hands that molded them with such extraordinary care and reverence. For the Edo people, these aren't just artifacts. They are tangible reminders of their own resilience. They are a powerful testament to the fact that art and culture, the very soul of a people, cannot be entirely conquered. They can only be displaced. Yet, the true legacy isn't something you can only see behind glass. It is lived, not merely observed. It's in the descendants of the original casters, who continue their work today, skillfully blending ancestral wisdom with their own contemporary artistic vision. The workshops in Benin City hum with life. You can see apprentices, their faces etched with concentration, learning through quiet observation and dedicated practice, absorbing the craft just as it has been for centuries. You can feel the energy as communities celebrate the cultural significance of each newly completed piece. Every casting is a ceremony, in itself a profound dialogue between the past and the present, between the spirit world and the human hand, between the elemental forces of fire and metal. It's a tradition that breathes. Even now, these bronzes, both ancient and modern, remain powerful symbols of endurance, identity, and pride. They are a constant reminder, not just to the Edo people, but to the entire world, that true artistry is inseparable from the human experience. They show us that the universal pursuit of beauty, of precision, and of spiritual connection is absolutely timeless. It transcends borders, languages, and epochs. The bronzes affirm a fundamental truth, that culture, memory, and resilience are not carried solely in objects. No matter how precious, they are carried in the hearts and hands of the people who create, who remember, and who pass the flame to the next generation. Let's pause once more. The fire has burned down to glowing embers, and the night is deep and quiet. We rest beneath a canopy of brilliant stars, feeling the cool night air. It's a moment for reflection, for absorbing the depth of this incredible story of survival and creation. So, in closing, the legacy of the Benin Bronze casters is both tangible and ephemeral. It's solid. You can feel it in the weight of a finished sculpture, see it in the polished surface reflecting the light, trace it in the intricate symbols etched into the metal. But it is also something you can't quite touch. It resonates in the knowledge that this art form survived fire, invasion, and the scattering of its greatest treasures across continents. It thrives in the stories shared between teachers and students, elders and children, a golden thread linking generations across the vast expanse of centuries. From the molten furnaces of history to the vibrant workshops of the present day, the caster's spirit endures. Each piece they create is a bridge between past and present. A bridge between phenomenal human skill and a whisper of divine inspiration. A bridge between a culture that was nearly lost and a culture that has been so beautifully preserved. In honoring their craft, we do more than just admire art. We honor the incredible power of resilience, the boundless nature of creativity, and the strong, unbroken thread of Benin's magnificent heritage. The night has deepened now. The fire before us burns lower, its embers glowing softly, like molten bronze cooling in a mold. We've journeyed far together tonight, haven't we? We've walked through the intense heat and hardship of the caster's furnaces, felt the weight of history in the halls of the Ober's palace, where bronze whispered stories of kings and queens. We've stood witness to the violence of fire and looting, a scar on the timeline of this incredible art form. And finally, we've found ourselves in the quiet, yet powerful, resilience of the workshops that still breathe and create in Benin City today. The story of the Benin Bronze casters is so much more than a story about art. It's a story about memory, etched into metal. It's about endurance, the ability to withstand immense pressure and not just survive, but continue to create. It's about the unshakable human spirit, its incredible capacity to shape profound beauty even from the crucible of danger and loss. These bronze objects are not silent artifacts. If you listen closely, they speak. They speak of ancient rituals, of deep devotion, of fierce resistance, and of unwavering pride. They are a testament to the fact that a culture can be scattered across the globe, but it cannot be destroyed. It can be looted, but its memory cannot be erased. Let's just pause here for a moment. Listen to the soft crackle of the fire as we rest together beneath this vast, starry sky. The bronzes remind us that time is a paradoxy, is both the fire that consumes and the forge that creates. Each piece carries the immense weight of centuries. The blistering heat of the furnace, the whispered prayers of the casters seeking protection for their hands, the authoritative commands of kings, the deep collective grief of colonial theft, and now the burgeoning pride of modern reclamation. And through it all, they still shine. They stand as mirrors, reflecting not only the intricate world of the Ido people, but also the world we inhabit now. They pose a question to each of us. How do we honor, how do we protect, and how do we facilitate the return of what was so violently lost? In every museum around the world where a Benin bronze rests behind a pane of glass, there is a silence. But it's not an empty silence. It's a silence filled with urgent, echoing questions about ownership, history, and justice. And back in every bustling workshop on Eugen Street in Benin City, you will find an answer. The answer is in the rhythmic clang of the hammer, the roar of the furnace, and the skilled hands of the artists. The answer is that the art lives on. Hands still mold fire and earth into lasting, beautiful forms. The memory was never broken. It is simply being reforged, stronger than before. So, as you go about your day, or perhaps as you lie under the stars tonight, let your mind drift with the glowing embers of this story. Imagine the sound of a hammer striking bronze, a rhythm that has echoed through generations. Picture the intense glow of the furnaces against the dark Nigerian night, a beacon of creativity. Hear the low, steady rhythm of chants offered to the gods to guide and protect the caster's hands. Imagine the bronzes themselves, the serene heads of aubers, the intricate narrative plaques, the elegant leopards not just as static objects, but as living, breathing stories, each one carrying the weight and the triumph of a people's endurance. Let that thought be a source of comfort and inspiration, that even in the face of fire and fury, culture can and will endure. Beauty can and will rise again. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories from across the continent. It helps us continue to bring these important narratives to light. Until next time, stay curious. You are under baobab skies.